Hello and welcome to another missing person video. I originally wasn't going to cover this case because I believe that others have already done so sufficiently thoroughly. I don't normally watch other people's videos on missing people because I don't want to get influenced by their opinions, but this is one that's a little bit more famous in the community, and what can I say, my curiosity got the better of me. A quick search led me to this photo being shared around by numerous accounts on Facebook. It probably won't shock you to learn that nearly every piece of information in this photo is wrong and have been refuted by other YouTube channels already. I do have a couple of points that I can contribute to the conversation, and according to the community poll, this is something that people are interested in seeing. So, let's talk about the case of Stacey Arras. Yosemite National Park was established in 1864 and is best known for its waterfalls, according to the National Park Service. The park spans nearly 1,200 miles, and the landscape varies greatly across that expanse. The area that we will be interested in for this case is a loop that started at Tuolumne Meadows and would tour the High Sierra Camp by way of mules. Specifically, the first stop on the tour would be Sunrise High Sierra Camp. This camp was established in 1961 and sits just below the tree line at an elevation of 9,600 feet. The camp sports a fantastic view overlooking a nearby meadow with many land features, such as ponds, domes, cliffs, and ridges. At some times during the year, the nearby meadow would have small ponds and lakes that form. However, during the time that Stacey was there, the meadow would have been dry. Close by is Sunrise Lake's trailhead, which leads to 3 lakes bearing the same name. There are several trails around the camp, and the book Off the Wall, Death in Yosemite, written by the search and rescue expert Charles Farabee, the author clarifies that there are, quote, enough trails to be confusing, close quote, in the area where Stacey went missing. This appears to be a reference to the many smaller game trails and human traffic trails that intercut the primary trailheads in the area that show up on maps. This information is left out of Missing 411, despite the book being used as a source when it comes to search effort on the following page. More on that later. Stacey Ann Arras was born on September 29th, 1966, to George III and Carol Arras. She was 14 years old in 1981 and was living in the San Francisco area with her family. She was the youngest of 4, with older sisters Sandra and Stephanie, and an older brother, George IV. According to her mother, Stacey had been going on summer outdoor excursions similar to this one since she was a little girl. Stacey was familiar with the outdoors and presumably felt comfortable in this sort of environment. She would have been a sophomore at Westmont High School at the time that she went missing. On July 17, 1981, Stacey set out on a mule ride loop trip to visit the High Sierra camps with her father and about 10 other people who would have been strangers to her. This was a guided sort of tour with a park-employed wrangler by the name of Chris Grimes. They departed the stables at Tuolumne Meadows and headed south on the John Muir Trail before coming to a rest at High Cathedral Lake for lunch. After the break, the group mounted up again and headed south, continuing on the John Muir Trail before reaching their final destination for the evening, Sunrise High Sierra Camp. They arrived at around 3 p.m. and started to unload their packs into the camp cabins for the night. After unpacking her necessities and taking a quick shower, Stacey decided that she wanted to make the most of the trip by visiting a nearby lake, which was a popular spot to take nature photographs. This would have been a dual purpose to also let her stretch out her legs from the long day of riding. She got dressed in a white short-sleeved shirt, a pair of striped shorts, hiking boots, and an off-white windbreaker, as well as a gold anklet. She also put in her retainer for her teeth, grabbed her small Olympus camera with a neck strap, a pack of cigarettes, and some gum. She headed out, planning to make the hike to the lake by herself. She didn't make it far from the cabin before she ran into someone else who had also been on the tour, Gerald Stewart. We know from contemporary sources that he is the 70-ish-year-old man referenced in some other papers that don't explicitly say his name. I mention this since there are other people who have covered this case that say that there are no sources that use his name at the time, and that may add a layer of suspicion on him. Well, here's a paper that calls him by name and even says where he's from. I was able to find him on Ancestry.com as well. At least I'm almost certain that this is him. And I don't think that he deserves any suspicion on him. More on that as we continue. He was 77 in 1981, not 70 or 71, and he hailed from Burlingame, California. Stacey talked with him, and for one reason or another, they decided to make the trip to Sunrise Lake together. However, there were quite a few trails around the camp, and they weren't sure which trail to take and which way to go to reach the lake. They asked a camp employee, but their directions were insufficient since they also asked some backpackers which way to go. This still must not have been enough, since they finally went to the wrangler of the tour, Chris Grimes, and asked him for directions to Sunrise Lake. Now, believing that they knew well enough where to go, Stacey and Gerald headed out together. Gerald became quickly tired due to his age as well as the elevation of the park, and it's reported that this happened before they made it even 50 yards out of the camp, but others say that he managed to hang in there for about 20 minutes. Given that they had to wander around the camp asking different people for directions, I think it's possible that both of these things are true, meaning that he was with her for 20 minutes, but only managed to actually get about 50 yards up the trail by the time that he became tired. Regardless, Gerald sat down just off the trail to take a breather, but he told Stacey that she could go on without him. Stacey did continue on her own, and this probably wasn't a big deal to her since this had been her original plan to begin with, and now she didn't have to deal with a man in his 70s following her around. As she set off, Chris Grimes happened to look up from his work with the mules and saw that Stacey was standing on a rock looking into the distance. It was either this precise moment or when Gerald bid Stacey continue on her own that was the last time that she was reportedly seen by another person. Some undetermined amount of time passed. Considering that the lake that was Stacey's destination was a mile and a half down the road, it would not have been unusual for her to be gone for several hours, especially considering that she was supposed to be walking around the lake taking pictures. Thus, the only reference that I see to an exact time that she was eventually missed was quote-unquote late Friday. The initial search for her was only really comprised of the camp employees looking around informally, thinking that perhaps she had come back to the camp but had not yet checked in with her father. When they were unable to find her at the camp, they notified the park rangers about the situation by radio, and the official search would start on the following day. Thus, Stacey was left to fend for herself overnight in the wilderness before the search really even began. The search effort is mostly reported to be impressive for the time. Helicopters were quickly utilized as early as the 18th, the day after she went missing, for the search effort. This deployment was so rapid, in fact, that there was a memo sent from the chief ranger to the superintendent about there needing to be better communication and coordination when it came to flights in the area. Basically, there was a concern that there might be an in-flight accident if flight times and locations were not better communicated. It appears that in order for the helicopters to be able to search the ground effectively, they had to fly low, which made it hard for them to see other helicopters in flight. So it was a major safety concern that if there was any other aircraft in the area that were not explicitly sanctioned by the search coordinator, there could be a very serious accident. In addition to the helicopters, there was as many as 100 ground searchers and 8 dog teams as of the 21st. The dogs being used were German Shepherds and were trained to find any human scent rather than a particular person, something that bloodhounds would have been trained to do. It was also around this time that Stacey's father finally contacted his wife Carol to let her know what was happening. They didn't tell her sooner since the rangers were confident that they'd be able to find her in a couple of days, and they didn't want to worry her unnecessarily. The search was cut down to about half of the original strength by the 23rd. The search steadily petered out from there, with hope fading until it was eventually called off somewhere between 9 and 12 days later. It's reported both ways. One ranger is quoted as saying, She just seemed to have disappeared from the face of the earth. As part of the search effort, the NPS also questioned backpackers who may have been in the area, but nothing ever came of this. George, Stacey's father, continued searching for another 2 weeks over the weekends before he too had to stop the search. The only comment from searchers that seemed to explain the disappearance was this, quote, "The rugged area has many nooks and crannies someone could have crawled into, seeking shelter from the nighttime temperatures, and never be seen." Close quote. Indeed, the area was treacherous off the trail with crags and crevices that even posed problems for dog handlers that were traversing the area, according to a search and rescue professional that I spoke with. Nothing that was confirmed to belong to Stacey was ever found. I want to be clear, her camera lens cap was never located, and I'm not sure where this claim even originates, though I have an idea. There were search documents that say point blank that no sign of her was ever found, and this article even mentions the camera specifically as well. I think it's safe to say that whoever came up with the camera lens cap evidence is either mistaken or has access to records that nobody else has seen. I mean, there's even this article quoting a ranger, which states that they didn't find so much as a gum wrapper. In Mr. Farabee's book, Off the Wall, The Death in Yosemite, he says that the search for Stacey included 8,004 man-hours, 57 in-flight hours from helicopters, and involved 4 different agencies. The total cost to the NPS was $99,845. That's about $340,000 in today's money. I want to address something brought up in Missing 411. Pilates asked the perhaps rhetorical question, how far could a 14-year-old girl travel on her own? Well, let's consult a source previously cited by Pilates himself to answer that question. The book Lost Person Behavior by Robert Coaster indicates on page 151 that people of Stacey's age can travel up to 13.3 miles in a mountainous, temperate environment. For the sake of transparency, 75% of the cases referenced in the book only go 3 miles or less. What that leaves the remaining 25%, a quarter of cases, traveling up to 13. This leads nicely into some theories about what may have happened to Stacey. Because no trace was ever found, there were a lot of theories thrown around. One that was more popular than some others was the idea that she hiked out of the park to the main road in order to hitchhike home. Allegedly, she was having some family problems and she may have been missing her boyfriend. To be frank, I think that this theory is completely without merit, as teenagers do dumb things, but it had taken them all day to get where they stopped to camp, and going on foot all the way back before it got dark, especially considering she didn't have a flashlight or anything like that, seems to be like a pretty unlikely thing to try and do. Further, she started the hike with a companion, something that I doubt she would have wanted had her plan to be to take off, although, again, from what I can tell, his joining her was not planned. Another theory is that she just got lost. I know. This is a pretty wild theory, but let's just stick with it for a second to see if we can get through it together. For this theory, we need to consider the time. They arrived at camp at 3 p.m. Stacey took a shower, spent some time in the camp asking for directions, then headed out. We don't have a definite timeline for when she left, but I don't think it'd be a stretch to say that Stacey and Gerald left close to 4 p.m., if not after. As Gerald only lasted about 20 minutes, we can use the average hiking speed of 2 miles per hour and assume that it would have taken her about an hour or so to reach Sunrise Lake number 3. A theory that I want to talk about, though, suggests that she was actually heading for the more scenic Sunrise Lake number 2, which was another half a mile down the road. Considering the slow start, as well as the higher elevation that she was used to, she would arrive at Sunrise Lake number 2 sometime after 5 p.m. I'll read this next part verbatim from the online post that originates from, since I believe the author of that post puts it very well. Quote, "While hiking to Sunrise Lakes from Sunrise High Sierra Camp, it's definitely hard to get lost. However, once you're there, it's a different story. If you're going to take a photo of Sunrise Lake number 2 from the western shore like everyone else does, you have to leave the trail for a few hundred feet at its northernmost point. Just like every other lake in Tuolumne, around the water is very heavily wooded with a very short line of sight. After taking photos and heading back to the trail, it would be incredibly easy to start heading the wrong way on the trail as both directions on the trail head south. Additionally, both directions are going to put one of the Sunrise Lakes on your left. Number 3 heading back to camp, and number 1 heading in the wrong direction. And both are going to be going slowly uphill for a very short amount of time. Both directions are going to have you take a left and then head east for a short time before a steep downhill section to a more wooded area followed by a meadow. The topography is incredibly similar, and much of Tuolumne looks and feels very similar. If Stacey went to the wrong meadow, it would have looked very similar to the meadow that Sunrise Sierra High Camp is in, and it would have been starting to get darker at this point with sunset around 8:30. After looking around, the most likely place would be to continue heading south since the lakes are just straight north of Sunrise High Sierra Camp and she hadn't reached the camp yet. She would be able to cover another mile south of this meadow fairly quickly since it's very flat, and the sense of urgency and impending darkness without a flashlight, it would have felt like she was almost there. Close quote. You can check out the entirety of this write-up linked in the description. I highly recommend it if you're interested in this case at all. I know it's a very mundane answer, but I think it's at least a likely answer. My only issue with this particular theory is that Stacey would have been walking more or less towards the setting sun if she went the wrong way, and I would assume that that would be a pretty strong indicator to her that she had made a mistake. That said, the trail is angled and practically mirrored, as stated in the post, so if she wasn't paying attention or if she had accidentally spent way too much time at the lake already, I can see how it would be an easy mistake to make. I also want to point out that the town that Stacey is from is pretty much at sea level. Here, the elevation is 9,600 feet. I don't know if you've ever experienced an elevation change like that, but it can make any physical exertion very difficult. Combine that with the fact that Stacey was a smoker, which I want to clarify was not uncommon for that time, and it's entirely possible that her pace would have been far slower than the average adult hiking speed of 2 miles per hour, which again just adds weight to the idea of getting lost in the dark. Then, and this is all my opinion by the way, but I think it is very likely that if it got dark and she spent an hour or more going the wrong way, it's very possible that the cold temperatures were too much for what she was wearing, and she sought shelter in a crevice, as speculated by the ranger that I quoted before, or that she slipped and fell into a crevice accidentally. Either way, the likelihood that she would ever be found in a place like that is near zero. All of this theorizing and so on assumes the best possible scenario as well, that Stacey did not leave the main trail in favor for a more direct route or of a game trail or to take a photo that was off the trail or even just to relieve herself. In that case, it's entirely possible that once she got off the trail, she got lost at any point along the hike, or worse, she opted for a shortcut on the way back, or what she thought was the way back, because it was starting to get dark, only to then get off the trail, get lost, and possibly head in the wrong direction. Moving on from the theories, there have been quite a few people complaining about how the records for this case are not easily obtained, or indeed, obtainable at all. Chief among these complainers would be David Paulides himself, who spends a great deal of time in his book talking about how he felt snubbed by the NPS and how he feels that his Freedom of Information Act request was not fulfilled because of some sort of conspiracy or cover-up or perhaps even personal dislike. Others have similarly tried and failed to get the records beyond what is publicly available already. These requests are shut down on the grounds that they could affect law enforcement solving the case. I want to talk about why, or at least why, what I believe is why this is. I have filed many Freedom of Information Act requests. When I get documents back, I am pleasantly surprised. It seems like every jurisdiction has different policies on releasing information on cases that are still technically open. I've had requests denied on cases that are decades old with zero movement on them and no suspicion of foul play, simply because it seems to be the department's policy to deny all requests for open cases on the grounds that it could affect any future investigation. And technically, it does fit this exemption, as just because they don't suspect foul play doesn't mean that they can prove that there wasn't foul play. But overall, less than half of my requests are filled, and the ones that I do get back are sometimes so redacted they are essentially useless. Some states are worse at this than others, but this is my general experience with it. All of this to say, it is not unusual for a case to get denied. It is not unusual to be told that documents will not be released until a case is closed. This doesn't mean that there's a conspiracy. It means that you're dealing with an organization that doesn't feel obligated to be transparent and has some admittedly underhanded but legal policies. I guess you could sue them and take them to court for the exact definition of these exemptions, but I don't think anybody has actually done that yet. I'm happy that Missing 411 has put a spotlight on this case, but I'm aggrieved that Paulides is spreading what I believe to be misinformation about Stacey's disappearance that is frequently and uncritically regurgitated by others. This misinformation does a disservice to Stacey and her memory, and by extension, her family. Her life and presumably death are being used to further a narrative. On screen are claims by Missing 411, and you may recognize that this appears to be the source of information of that incredibly incorrect post being shared around on Facebook that I showed earlier. Here are my corrections. To me, particularly egregious is the implication that she was only missing for minutes before the search started, and pretending not to know how far she could have gotten when he has referenced the very book that has the answer that he's looking for. While I don't know what happened to Stacey, I think that we have enough information to draw some very easy and logical inferences based on the information that we do have. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I'd like to just take a moment to thank my patrons over at patreon.com for their support that makes videos like this possible. Thank you so much. Those of the public recognition tier are on screen now. And of course, thank you for watching. Until next time, take care.